How this is going to run. And we'll get started. My name is Nancy Angevine Sands, and I'll be your host for this evening. With me is Margaret Horvath. Many of you may know Margaret. She's the Office Administrator for the Parent and Community Engagement Office and the holder of all knowledge. So we are quite dependent on her later on this evening with your questions. Just to let you know, this is scheduled to run 2 hours. If we can end it early, that would be great for you guys. I'm going to do question and answers at the very end. So what I would ask you to do is, the chat has been disabled, but you'll notice the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can put any questions there. If there are if just any question, you can do it in lowercase, but we're going to stop twice throughout this presentation so that we can have a bit of a chance to have a bit of interactive chats about things. Unfortunately, we can't go into breakout rooms in a webinar setup, so we're going to do it that way. If you could give your responses at that time in capital letters, it'd be great and easier for me to see and respond to. So when we break to do little activities, capital letters. If you have a question that comes up at any time, just write it in the Q&A in lowercase letters. I'm hoping, if we're going to do the bit, that I will be going in and out of sharing my screen. That will depend on how my lovely little computer is feeling this evening. If not, I'm going to ask you the questions and you'll just be answering it to yourself and the space in your room. So I think we'll get started. I just want to make sure there's nothing else I need to tell you. And we are recording this. We are recording this presentation, and it will appear on the PCO Engagement Office's YouTube channel sometime in the near future. So if you want to go back and watch it again, it will be there. All right, so part of the day that makes me the most nervous. Yay! All right, so this webinar is called Leading Engagement, and it's aimed at council chairs, vice chairs, and co-chairs. If you are neither of those, you are still welcome to be here, but I'm going to be talking about chairs and how you can lead effectively this year in council. My name is Nancy Angevine Sands, as I've already said. I'm a consultant with Equal Step. I help to support school councils, educators, pre-service teachers, and communities that are looking to build effective engagement practice. And you can find me on Twitter @with Equal Step. If you have any questions or anything you want to follow up with me, my email is withequalstep@gmail.com. And I also have a podcast called Schools Don't Own Education. You can find it on iTunes and Spotify, or voiced voiced.ca, which is an online radio station dedicated entirely to education. In my podcast, I look at family engagement from the viewpoint of parents, parent leaders, researchers, community groups, all different angles. All right, so that's my shameless plug. Let's get started. Oops. I would ask you to try to stay engaged through this. I know it's a little hard on Zoom. We're all kind of tired of Zoom meetings. But mainly why I say that is there may be things that I say or suggest that make you feel a little bit of discomfort, or you don't agree with it, you don't understand why I'm saying that. Please sit in that discomfort, because it's there that we do our most learning. And when you have the opportunity, when we break up, please feel free to speak your truth. I always like to start with this guy because he reminds us that we need to keep our eye on the ball in everything we do in family engagement. And in school councils, keeping your eye on the ball is your mandate. What is your mandate? Regulation 612 tells us that the purpose of school councils is through the active participation of parents to improve pupil achievement. That's your number one goal, to improve pupil achievement and to enhance the accountability of education system to parents and caregivers. And I'm hoping that over the next hour and a half or 2 hours, I will be able to give you the tools that will help you to do those things. We have to remember that school councils are advisory bodies. We provide advice to our principal, our board, the Ministry of Education. We cannot dictate how things are going to happen. We can just give from our best knowledge and ideas, advice. The principal is required by Regulation 613 to respond to that advice so that when the council gives him or her advice, it just doesn't disappear into the ether. They must say to you, come back at maybe after they've considered the advice, come back and say to you, yes, great idea, that's what we're going to do. How would you like to help us to implement that? Or we like the idea, but it won't quite work the way you suggested, and here's why. Can we work together to find a way to make it work? Or look, at this time, that advice won't work, and here is why it won't work. And let's figure out what we can do instead. So Regulation 612 mentions only a couple of things that school councils must do. You must consult with parents and students at the school on matters under consideration by the council. And we're going to talk about that later on in this presentation. You must develop bylaws. The regulations are quiet on a number of things. They suggest or give leeway to councils. So it's the best idea for councils to develop bylaws. And the next set of these webinars that are going to be occurring the rest of this month are going to look at bylaws, and I'm going to be talking about them later. You must keep minutes and financial records for at least 4 years for examination by anyone connected with the school that wants to see them. You could keep them online, but you should also have a hard copy somewhere in the school, in a binder in the office, in the library, but somewhere where they can be retrieved and looked at. And you must produce an annual report and a financial report. The board requires a financial report, the TDSB, and that must be submitted to your principal and the board by June of every year. I want to begin with this quote. Parental involvement, as practiced in most schools and reflected in the research literature, avoids issues of power and assigns parents a passive role in the maintenance of school culture. Parental engagement designates parents as citizens in the fullest sense, change agents who can transform urban schools and neighborhoods. And it's my hope that after you finish with tonight's presentation and perhaps the presentations that come in the rest of this month on bylaws and in January on digging deeper into engagement, you will be able to move into parental engagement, become a change agent in your school and move into really effective, meaningful engagement practice instead of just being a passive role, maintaining what the school culture, what the system says must happen. And we're going to look at that a little bit later and look at some of the difficulties in the way things have always been done and how they are not inclusive or equitable. So as a leader of your council, you should always strive for three things in whatever you do in your work. Ask yourself, are we being accountable to our parent and school community? Are we being transparent in everything that we do? And are we being inclusive of all of the members, all of the communities within our school, of our educators, of our students. We're going to look at how to lead in 3 ways tonight. The first way is leading in your council. And then after that, we're going to look at leading in your community. And finally, how to lead with the school. A leader is someone who is willing to step up, put themselves out there, and lean into courage. And I know, as a past council chair myself, that it takes sometimes a lot of courage to be a school council chair or vice chair, and to lead in a way that is open and inclusive and accountable. So I am leaving this with you in the hopes that you will see it as, yes, this is a tough job, but it's a necessary job, and it's a job I'm up for. So Regulation 612 speaks to certain things that the chair and co-chair must do. The first one is to arrange the meetings. So that's the chair's job, in conjunction and collaboration with the principal and the other members of your council. You should be sitting down, if you haven't done it already, at the next meeting and set out the dates for your meetings over the next school year. The 612 tells us that we must have at least 4 meetings a year, and I suggest that you have at least 6. So set those dates, being cognizant of the principal's calendar, which is jam-packed with things, being cognizant of what your members are able to do, and when your community may be most able to attend your meetings. Do you want to alternate between, say, Tuesdays and Thursday evenings? Do you want to make 1 or 2 of the meetings during the day? This is discussions that you need to have. You also are responsible for preparing the agenda. I have heard of a lot of councils where the principal prepares the agenda and you are able to take that task off of their hands. That's your job as the chair. You prepare the agenda while collaborating with the principal, and asking the members of your council if there's anything that they've heard that should be brought up, asking if you have committees, checking with the chairs of the committees, do they need to make a report, making known to your parent community at large that they may suggest things that can go on to the agenda. But as the chair, you are responsible for creating the agenda. I remember when I was council chair in my children's elementary school, at one point I had this really great principal, and my favorite part of the month actually was in meeting with her and to talk about the agenda, which I would write, and I would say, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I've heard, what the members have heard, I think it should come up. How do you think we should handle this? And then she would tell me things that she had heard, and did I think that they needed to be on the agenda? And so together, even though it was my responsibility, together we created that agenda. It's your responsibility, of course, to chair meetings. If you cannot, obviously your co-chair or your vice chair would do that job. It's your responsibility to ensure that minutes are done. That doesn't mean you have to take the minutes, but to make sure that you have a recorder, somebody who is there who's going to record the minutes and then prepare those minutes and make them available to you to send out. I think one of the most difficult jobs is to facilitate conflict resolution. And that may be conflict between members on council. It may be conflict between members and parents. It might be conflict between parents and the principal or the teacher, but in that case, that's more your job to suggest places and resources that they could use to resolve that conflict. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But it's mainly it's 99% to resolve conflict that arises within the council. And in the template for the new bylaws that are coming out this month, there's a whole section on conflict resolution to help you through that part. You are, as the chair, ex officio on committees that the council establishes. That does not mean you have to go to all of the committee meetings, but it does mean that you are able to go to the meetings and to receive any minutes that they may produce. And finally, as I've mentioned a couple times, it's your responsibility to communicate with the principal, to collaborate with the principal. Remembering that the principal has a really busy job, has a lot of forks in the fire. So it's up to you to try to figure out what's the best way to do that. And sometimes to lead the effort to collaborate. Sometimes the principal may not have the time or may not be thinking that they need to do that. So as a leader of council, how can you help your principal to learn the benefits of collaboration with you and his or her council? So I just want to run over a couple of the responsibilities for parent reps, because as the chair, it's your responsibility to ensure that your members at the beginning of the year and throughout the year know what their role is, to assist them when they're having any trouble, to help them get over any challenges or barriers that they may have. And this also, your teacher and non-teacher rep are members of council, and so you're there to help lead them and to help support them as well. So a parent's responsibilities are to participate on any committees established by council that interest them. They don't have to participate on all of the council committees. They may choose to only participate on one, but it is one of their responsibilities. It's one of their responsibilities to contribute to the discussion of council. And as the leader of council, it falls upon you to help them to feel comfortable to do that. And if you notice that they aren't participating, to solicit their views and their thoughts on different topics that are being addressed. It is the parent responsibility to solicit views of parents and members of the community to share with council. This is an ongoing job, but especially in areas of consultation that we'll talk about later. It's up to parent reps to go out and listen. What are they hearing? What are they hearing in the schoolyard? What are they hearing at the store whenever they talk to parents? And it's everyone's responsibility to observe the code of ethics and the bylaws of the council. I'll say at this point that in the school council handbook, which is available online, if you just Google Ontario School Council Handbook, you'll get the online version from the Ministry of Education. There is in there a suggested code of ethics. And you may want to photocopy that and make it available to your council members and remind them that these are the code of ethics we're going to follow. And you may, if you're having some issues, you may want to post them at every meeting. So as I said, there must be 4 meetings a year. It's up to you and your council and your principal to decide how many you have. You have to start within 30 days of school, and an election has to take place before that. At a meeting, quorum must be majority of members in attendance, and usually 50% plus 1. And the majority of that must be parents. So that's up to you to ensure that maybe just sending out a reminder to your members, okay, don't forget, there is a meeting next week. If there's someone who can't attend for some reason, would you please let me know? And if you find that you have a member who is missing a few meetings in a row, you may want to sit down and chat with them about what's going on, what are the challenges, how can you help them get back into the swing of things. The council meetings may be at school or they may be off-site. If they're off-site, you have to have the extra insurance. And of course, it's up to the principal to give notice. As the chair or co-chair of your council, you want to ensure that your meetings take place in a welcoming, inclusive space. And even though you're meeting online again this year, your meetings can be welcoming, they can be inclusive. You want to make sure, and you already have your members chosen for this year. So think about this, both if you have to fill vacancies, who might you look for to fill the vacancies, and also for next year. Does the membership of your council reflect the makeup of your community? Have you gone out to the different people in your community, the different groups in your community, to make sure that there's representation sitting on council, so that all of your community, their opinions, their needs, their wants are reflected around the council table? Welcome newcomers by name, right? Oh, hi, it's really great that you're here, Margaret. I hope that you'll come back. And welcome everybody, but especially newcomers. Make them feel welcome. I've heard of too many meetings where people come for the first time and they're made almost to literally stand at the back of the room because there's no more chairs and to sit down. And that parent is not going to come back again. And even if they're on a Zoom meeting, if they've not been asked any questions, if they've not been welcomed, if their presence in the Zoom meeting hasn't been acknowledged, you're not going to see them again. Especially in Zoom meetings now, announce the norms for the meeting and the discussion. Let them know, is chat going to be disabled, or is it going to be on? Where, just as I did at the beginning of this meeting, where do you want questions to go? Do you want them to use the reaction button if they want their name on the speaker list? How is it all going to work so that everybody feels really comfortable and they're not struggling to figure out what's going on? Especially in a Zoom meeting, assign a member of council to keep a speakers list. And if you have a number of people, their job is to run through all of the people that are there, not just the ones they see on the main screen, but keep running through all of the people that are there to see if anyone's put their hand up, if anyone's done a reaction button, something so that they know who wants to speak. I try to urge councils to have all of their reports, to receive all of their reports in written form prior to the meeting, so that those reports can go out to the members and the community at large in written form, and everyone can read them beforehand and be prepared when they come to the meeting. So then what do you do? And when I say meeting, a written form, it doesn't have to be all in paragraphs, it'll be just point form notes. But then at the meeting, the person who's making their report, they can just highlight one or two really important things. And then the rest of the time that's assigned to that. So let's say the principal, because quite often their report takes up a large space of time. The principal submits a written report. Everyone reads it ahead of time. Then at the meeting, the principal can highlight just one or two important things. And the rest of the time for the principal can be left to questions that parents or the members may have from what they've read in the report, suggestions they may want to make, things they might want to bring up to the principal, so that it's really becomes a good time for discussion, sharing of knowledge, and deeper understanding. You want to make sure that your meetings have meaningful, relevant content. I often say that I've lost whole years of my life to school council meetings that did not have meaningful, relevant content for me, but I kept going back. But there are a lot of parents who won't. Our parents have really busy, stressful now, especially lives. And if they go to a school council meeting and they aren't learning something that's going to help them with their child, let's remember the guy with the eye on the ball, pupil achievement. If they're not going to learn something that's going to help them with their child, that's going to help their child to achieve, they're not going to come back. But if you offer them meaningful, relevant content, and what's meaningful and relevant to a parent, their child's well-being, their child's academic performance. If you offer that to them, they will come back. And on Zoom, use discussion in breakout rooms. I mean, why not? Let's take advantage of Zoom. We may be tired of it, but this is a great time for council to let their parent community know what you're doing and to let them know that you're there for them. I've heard a lot of council chairs say that they're having more people come to meetings than ever before. Well, make it your goal this year to provide that welcoming, inclusive, meaningful place for parents to land and to feel that they are supported and that they can learn things that's going to help them. So that next year, fingers crossed, when we're back in the classroom, when we're back in the school for meetings, they will come out because they know it's worth their while. All right, here's where we're going to try my stop share. I want you to think that you have a parent who comes to a council meeting. I said for the first time, it doesn't matter. You have a parent who comes to a council meeting and complains that their child is being bullied in class. All right. My child, Mary, is being bullied in Mr. Smith's class, and it's not fair, and I don't like what he's doing, and this can't happen. I want you to stop and think, what would you as a council chair do at that moment? All right, so I'm going to stop share, I hope. And I'm going to ask you to write in the Q&A box in capital letters, what would you do if a principal came in, I mean, not principal, I'm sorry, if a parent came into your room and started to talk about their child being bullied in a specific class? Just write it in the Q&A. Ask this parent if they've spoken to the child's teacher yet. Anybody else? Show empathy, yes. Ask them to talk offline and say that we'll share resources with them. First welcome and acknowledge it. Advise them to contact the principal about a specific case. Advise the parent that council can deal with themes, but not specific cases. Ask the parent how they would imagine the problem solved. Ask the principal to review the anti-bullying policy. I suggest to speak to the teacher, then the principal, and next step would be to speak to the trustee. Let them know what steps are there for them. I suggest, okay, I think I got that one. Acknowledge the challenge they are facing and that they are not alone. Publicly review. Ask the principal to review the anti-bullying policy. Great, those are all great answers. And some of you one of you hit right on the head, and that doesn't mean you passed the test, you all did. But you cannot have personal items come to the floor of council. And if you make that clear from the beginning at your council meetings, even if you don't, look, there's a lot to remember, so if you forget, but if a parent comes with a personal item, yes, I really love what you said about reading it with sympathy. Say, oh, you know, that must be really difficult for you and for your child. Unfortunately, we are restricted from talking about personal items at the floor of council, but we can address this broadly. And we can talk a little bit about bullying. Is this an issue that other parents here have, without telling me specifics? Is this an issue that some of you other parents are having? And you can, with very tight control, talk about it. And then also say to the parent, if you wouldn't mind staying after the meeting, you and I can have a little chat about this. And then, as many of you said, that's where you can advise them. First talk to the teacher and then the principal. And then if that doesn't work and you're not satisfied, then you can go to the trustee or superintendent. You can advise them of where to find the parent concern protocol on the TDSB website. You could either with them or in the broader meeting, ask if there would be interest in having a presentation on anti-bullying, or having the principal do a presentation at a future meeting about anti-bullying practices in TDSB and anti-bullying practices specifically in that school. Or you could look to bring somebody in either from the board or somewhere else about anti-bullying, or whatever the topic is. But as many of you said, the point is to acknowledge the concern, to let them know that unfortunately you can't address it specifically at that time, but to talk about it a little bit broadly, just so they feel they aren't being, oh, we can't talk about it, move on, so that they can feel acknowledged and that they can feel that, yes, you've heard them and you're going to be there for them, and then provide resources moving on. So very good. Those are great answers. Here we go again. Come on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, continue to talk about leading in council. Traditional definitions of family engagement, or what I would call family involvement, are very school-centric. That means they are centered around school needs, school wants. And so we see quite often school councils and schools who are looking to engage their parents to doing it through volunteering, either volunteering in the classroom, volunteering at school council events. They do it through fundraising. They do it, oh, we sent a newsletter out to you. We've told you what's going on. A lot of teachers think that as long as parents are making sure their kid is doing homework, that's engagement. And then school councils. A lot of school councils consider their engagement, their levels of engagement, by how many parents come out to a school council meeting. And that's not quite true, but as I say, they're all school-centric definitions of what engagement is. However, these traditional engagement definitions are based on studies that have been done over the last 50 years on white middle-class families. How do white middle-class families engage with their schools? What sort of things do white middle-class families want to do in schools? What sort of things do schools let white middle-class families do within their context? That's usually very strictly controlled by the system, and as I keep saying, very school-centric and very based in the norms and the understanding and the ways of knowing of the dominant white middle-class community. But what is the result of that? The result is that we have the myth of the hard to reach. Those parents that we all say, oh, they don't come out. They don't care. I've done everything I can to get them to engage, and they just don't want to. And the result of that is that it contributes to an alienating environment for working class families and families of color, because we know from more recent research that families of color, and to some extent working class families, either of color or white, will engage in their children's learning at home, not so much in the school, for a whole host of reasons. And the results are that their ways of engaging are devalued. They become marginalized, and they are devalued for the way that they engage because they don't come out to school-centric activities. They are blamed for the way that they want to engage in their child's learning. And we tend to think that, oh, well, we've got to fix that. We've got to fix those families. They're hard to reach. We've got to figure out how to fix them so that they will come in and they will come to fundraising activities, and they will come to school council meetings, and they will volunteer at any event we're doing, and they will volunteer in the classroom, so that they will fall into the white normative way of doing school-centric engagement. We assume that they lack the knowledge, the skills, the capabilities, or the care for their children because they aren't engaging the way that we have engaged for all of these years. And the final result of it is that the engagement that is school-centric tends to benefit the dominant families that are sitting around the table that are deciding what they want to do and what they need to do. For engagement to be successful, for pupil achievement to be achieved, anything you do should be relational, it should be linked to learning, and it should build the capabilities of parents and caregivers. Because what most recent research over the last decade or so has told us that the most effective form of engagement is when parents engage with learning in their home, right? Buying stuff for the school is nice, and it helps the teachers to teach. And in some small ways, it helps the students to learn. But one of the top indicators of pupil success, pupil academic success, is families engaging in learning in the home. So how are you, school council, going back to our guy with the eye on the ball, if your job is pupil achievement and making the system accountable, how are you going to do that? And again, the three ways: through relationships, learning, and building the capabilities of your parents. So school parent engagement, I like to say, begins and ends with relationships. We know for ourselves the relationships you have, then you're willing to work with people. So you need to begin by assessing the existing relationships that you have. If you feel, oh, you know, we don't get anybody out to meetings, like we really struggle and we only got 3 or 5 members to be on school council this year, then those members, the first thing you need to do this year, the most important thing that you can do this year, is to start building relationships with your parent caregiver community. Assess where your relationships, where's the council relationship with their parent community right now? Do they see you as all you do is put your hand in their pocket and ask for money? Or do they feel that you really care about them? It's about building mutual trust. I'm sure you know that in your personal relationships, if you don't trust people, you don't have much of a relationship with them. Your parents and caregivers are the same. You need to build trust. And you know what? You also have to do it with the teachers in your school. But help your families to feel comfortable with their differences, to feel comfortable with who they are, what they know, what they can do. Especially now with COVID still on, do wellness checks with your families. And that might mean a special Zoom meeting. It might mean sending something out and saying, I hope everyone's okay. Let us know if you need anything. Be authentic in what you're offering, be authentic in what you're asking, but listen. Because if relationships are important, listening and communication builds relationships. Listening is the one skill that allows leaders to connect across racial, cultural, gender, and socioeconomic differences, to gather rich data on the front lines of change, to build capacity through reflective questions, and to drive reform through the power of relationships. So communication is one of your major tools for building those relationships, because when you communicate effectively, you will increase the trust between home and school. Your parents will have more realistic expectations about what their child should and could be doing and about what the school should and could be doing for them. And they will become more committed to helping their children improve. And then everyone will feel more supported, including you. So I want you to take a piece of paper and a pencil, and I'm going to have a little task for you to do. And I'm going to give you 4 instructions, and they are no different than if we were all sitting in a room together. So I'll just let you get ready. Okay, ready? First of all, I want you to draw a circle. Then I want you to draw a triangle. Then I want you to put a square in the corner. And finally, I'd like you to write your name. Okay, so I asked you to draw a circle. I asked you to draw a triangle. I asked you to put a square in the corner. And then I asked you to write your name. So I'm wondering how many of you, what you drew look like what I have, or how many of what you drew looks close to what I have. Now, I've done this a number of times in person, and so I'm going to make a pretty good guess that hardly anybody's drawing looks like mine. And I'm going to ask you why. Why doesn't it look like mine? Because I was very clear. I knew what I wanted to, I knew the information I wanted to get across to you. I did it simply. I did only 4 instructions, very short instructions. The longest one was number 3, put a square in the corner. Everything, to my way of thinking, was very clear. And there really should be no reason why it doesn't look like mine, should there? Except that the communication was one way. I was making assumptions that everything I said you would understand. That when I said draw a triangle, you would know that I wanted a right angle triangle. Right? That when I said put a square in the corner, you would know that I meant the corner of the triangle. That was really clear to me because I knew what I wanted to communicate. But there was no way for you to ask me any questions. There was no way for you to clarify what I was saying. There was no way for you to say, what type of triangle do you want, Nancy? And what do you mean by your name? Do you want my first name? Do you want my last name? Because you all assumed when I said write your name that I wanted your name, when what I wanted was your name. Now imagine if I was saying that in a language that you were not completely fluent in. What would happen then? Okay, I like this exercise because I think quite often we think we're communicating, but we aren't. For communication to be effective, it must be two-way. And we must be good listeners. If you think back to Shane's quote, listening is the most important thing you can do. And it doesn't matter who your parent is. It doesn't matter their race, their ethnicity, their age. It doesn't matter what they do. Listening will help you to understand what they're trying to say to you, what they need. If we don't have effective two-way communication, if the way we communicate with our parents is only sending information out and not receiving anything back, we aren't having a dialogue, we're having a monologue, and you might as well put it out on robocall. And not only that, when you hear back from your parents, what are you going to do with that information? Because if you hear from parents, if they talk to you and you listen to them, but it disappears into an ether, they're not going to talk to you again, are they? Because they said, why would I talk to the council? They don't listen to me. They don't hear what I say. It doesn't mean you have to do everything, respond to everything you hear from your parents, but it does mean you have to acknowledge it and try to understand where they're coming from and try to think, what could you do? How could that what they've said influence your work? It's about being respectful to them. It's about speaking simply, which I thought I did, no edubabble, but making sure that you're speaking in a way that they will understand, right? I remember I was with my husband's cousins once, and his cousin's husband said something to her, and she didn't get it. She just disagreed, and he said to her, "I sent it on one frequency, but you received it on another." And I think we do that a lot. When we're talking with teachers, when we're talking with our parent community, we send it out on one frequency, but they receive it on another, and it's gobble. So we want to be clear. We want to make that what we're sending out, what we're communicating, and what we're hearing back is beneficial both for council and for the people who are receiving it and responding to it. And we have to understand that we need cross-cultural communication. So we have to consider translation and interpretation. Translation is written word, and interpretation is when someone comes in and it's a spoken word. And we're going to talk about that later. And Margaret is going to answer any of your questions that you have on that. So what sort of things have been set up by TDSB to help you with your communication? Well, there's the TDSB email, and this is what I'm talking about here is the shared TDSB school council account. And what it will come out is school council dot the name of your school at tdsb.on.ca. And every school council that signs up for it will have that same nomenclature. So if you want to communicate with the chair at a neighboring school, you know what their address is. It's school council dot the name of that school at tdsb.on.ca. And this email you can use to communicate with your parents and caregivers, to communicate with other councils, and to receive information from the TDSB. You also need this account to get School Messenger. School Messenger allows you to broadcast messages to your school community. You have to go through your principal to do that, but you are able to use that. You cannot receive emails back from Messenger, so anything you send out on Messenger, you have to say, you may reply to, and then give your shared email account. I know that right now there are a lot of problems for school councils in trying to get their email set up. I'm going to talk about it in a minute towards the end of this presentation. Margaret will be here too. There's one person doing this job, and we have 500 schools. So I can tell you to be patient in getting it. I know that we're into November and patience is running thin, but you need this email account. So let's just keep our fingers crossed and just keep at it to get it. You also have Zoom. You can use Zoom for your council meetings, for committee meetings, for consultation, for workshops, anything that council wants to do. And you also have Thought Exchange. And if any of you have taken part in the town halls in the last 2 years from the Parent and Community Engagement Office, you will have seen Thought Exchange. This is a way for you to send out a question to parents, and they can type their answer in and send it back on a whole variety of topics and things that council might want to know or goals they might want to do. All of this, hopefully, it's almost mid-November, all of this hopefully will be ready for you by mid to the end of November. The final thing I want to say to you about communication is to urge you to go to the margins. I first heard this on a webinar I was at with a group of parent engagement people in England. And the person who was talking said that they would send out surveys to their parents, as most of our councils now do, send out surveys at the beginning of the year. What do you want? What do you need? And when they got them back, they'd look at them and they'd set them aside, because they knew that the people that had answered those surveys were the parents that were already engaged or pretty close to engaged. It was the people at the margins who weren't answering for whatever reason that they really wanted to hear from. And who is at the margins in your community? That's something you need to figure out. Most often it's racialized families, it's low SES, low socioeconomic families, it's our immigrant families, our working families, our LGBTQ2 families. Not always. We have many councils where each of those groups that I've mentioned are sitting at the council table, are leading our councils. But we also know that the marginalized groups in our communities, they are at the margins. They aren't responding. We aren't hearing from them. We aren't hearing what their needs are. And if we don't hear from about their needs, if we aren't listening to them, then we can't respond to them. Listening leaders gather input from a broad range of stakeholders before articulating a clear and focused change imperative, and they continue to engage people along the way. They continue to engage people along the way. Not only do you need to go to your parents at the beginning of the year, but you need to go to them throughout the year. How do they like what you're doing? What didn't they like? What aren't you doing? What new things have come up that need to be addressed? Again, not just the ones who will answer your survey, but the people that are at the margins. I'm going to skip this one because I think this is a little bit hard, but what I would like you to consider is when you go back to council, and I hope that you will talk about who is at the margins in your council. Who are you not hearing from? And how could you hear from them? How can you get them to talk, to share, to trust, to communicate with you? If you're in a model school, can you use your CSW or your settlement worker? I know from the schools that my kids were in, every school had different subgroups, sub-communities, and each of those little subgroups had a leader or two, the person that they would go to if they wanted to know something. That person usually wasn't at the margins, but they were talking to the ones at the margins. If you go to them and get them to help you to do your work, to talk to the people that you don't normally hear from. So this is something I'd ask you to consider as you go forward. So now I'm going to move into leading in the school. And this is through consultation, and it addresses the question at the beginning, eye on the ball, about making the system accountable to your parents. You must, the ministry and the TDSB say that school councils must consult with their parent and caregivers on dress codes, code of conduct for students, the school improvement plan, or SIP, the SSON, or school statement of needs, safe school plans, budget, and issues of school-wide impact. TDSB says that the school committees, these are the school committees set up by the principal, usually staffed by teachers, must have representatives from the council on their Safe and Caring Schools Committee, on their budget committee, and on their staffing committee. So as the chair, it's up to you to collaborate with your principal on what that's going to look like. Will you have one or two parents actually sitting on the committee, in which case they would have to be available during the day, most likely, unless the committee meets in the evening? What requirements would they need? Like what skill set might be best to do those things? And then to collaborate with whoever is chosen to be on those committees so they understand their role, that they have to report back to school council and hear from school council and report that forward to the committee. You also can do informal consultation on expenditures of school funds. School TDSB policy says you cannot raise funds without a purpose. So you consult with your parent community. What do you think the school needs? What do we need to, or what do you as parents need that we are going to have to raise money to provide for? So speakers or resources, things like that. Field trips, lunch issues, any number of things that come up within the school, or things that council do, you want to consult with your parent community. So I'm going to talk for a minute about the school improvement plan. The school improvement plan is a roadmap that sets out the changes a school needs to make every year to improve the level of student achievement. And when I say student achievement, I'm sure, eye on the ball, that you know why you have to be part of this, because that's your mandate. Identifies when and how changes are to be made, and is mandated by the Ministry of Education. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions about what this could look like. First of all, the principal is required to share information with council on the work that the school is doing to produce the SIP. And this is done every fall, right? And that doesn't mean, as I used to see from the principals at my school council, where they come to school council and say, yep, here's our SIP, I'll read it to you, yep, done, okay, good, thanks, I consulted. No. Consultation means that you have to be part of the process of creating the SIP. So how might you do that? Well, you have three options. The first option is to form a council committee. Their job will be to go out and hold consultations with the parents and caregivers in your community on what their priorities are. The SIP falls under three categories: academic, well-being, and equity. Where is the school need to improve? What areas do they need to improve in academics, in well-being, and in equity? So this committee would go out and they would consult with their parents and caregivers. And remember, I said you could use Zoom for consultations, so you can set up online consultations, or you could go around and talk in small groups. We'll talk about that later on, about what parents consider to be in need of improvement in 1, 2, or 3 of those areas. And then they will submit that report to council, who will then approve it and pass it on to the principal. The second way you could do it is to invite parents and caregivers to a meeting, to have a conversation about the SIP, and to provide feedback to the principal. Now, what you're going to want to do, to be fair, is to have the principal prior to this, so maybe the meeting before, share information about how the school committee is doing with the SIP. What areas are they looking at? And then to have parents and caregivers at a meeting, a separate meeting from school council, or you hold a regular school council meeting, you get your business done really fast, and you use the next hour or so to look only at the SIP and get feedback, not only on what parents think about what the teachers have identified, but also what do the parents who are in this meeting, what do they feel should be considered for areas of improvement. Your third option is that council selects parent and caregivers who sit on the school SIP committee. They would participate in the discussions at that time and report back to council on their progress. Okay, I've given a link at the bottom. The PIAC has created a really great slide deck on the SIP and school SIP process, and what the SIP is and what it looks like and how councils can take part in it. It's a bit long, but it's very comprehensive and very good to ensure that what your council does with the SIP is what you are able to do. Now, the school statement of needs, it has to be completed every year. And in that, you are saying what you as a school council, what your parent and caregiver community feel is important in the selection of a new principal for your school. The committee should be led by the chair. your job. And you are responsible for submitting this to the superintendent each fall. And it should be fresh every year. And a lot of times councils will say to me, well, why should it be fresh every year? Because it hasn't changed. We still want the same thing. Well, you know what? Our schools do change, sometimes in imperceptible ways, but every year is a new year. And things have happened in the past year that nobody considered. And now it's maybe that's important. Or something that you thought was important last year or the year before is maybe not as important as it is now. And you want to consult with your community about what are their priorities, what do they think is really important in a principal. And on the form, there's a couple of different headings for suggestions of things that you might want to consider. The principal and the school staff have no part in this consultation. This is strictly, they have other ways of offering their advice for a new principal. This is strictly the parent and caregivers' feelings on what their school needs in a school leader, should the principal they have now leave. You might want to consider inviting your superintendent to a council meeting to discuss the school statement of needs, or after you have written, to talk with them about what your priorities are and why you've picked those priorities. Now, my suggestion, and this is coming just from me personally, is my suggestion is don't give a whole long laundry list of things you want, because when you do that, you're just opening yourself up to having them ignored. Right? If your kids come to you and they say, Mom, I want this and this and this and this and this and this and this, yeah, right. Okay, I'm making dinner. But if they come to you and they say, Mom, look, I would really like to do this. You know, how can we do it? You have a better chance of listening to them if you're anything like me as a parent. So think about in the categories, what are the 1, 2, maybe 3 most important things to your school community in a leader? What do you want from them? I'll give you an example. My kids went to a high school that had an exceptional athlete program. And a lot of our principals were, kind of oriented that way. And the council felt that the arts was lacking in our school. We had really great arts teachers, but it just wasn't getting the attention we liked. So into our SSON went a request that one of the things we wanted was someone that had an orientation to the arts, or that saw the importance of it and would work to help to build that within the school, not just the elite athlete program. This link at the bottom that I'm giving to you I think it's also from PIAC. It gives you some more information on the SSON for when you are creating it. So how can you do consultation in your school? Well, you can do listening circles where you bring people in, this year remotely. Just invite a group and say, we're open it up. This is the topic of conversation for the next hour. You have to make sure that as the chair that you or whoever you've assigned to chair the listening circle is actually listening and is making sure that everybody who is in the circle is having a chance to speak and is being respected for what they say. You can do focus groups where you might say for your SIP, if something has been identified as an academic need, for example, in a primary level, then you might just invite some specific primary parents, some representatives of each of your primary classes to come together and talk about that particular concern. Or if you have an equity concern in your school, to invite parents that question or those concerns who are most impacted by that, to bring them in and to listen to what they're saying and to listen to their suggestions for how you could go forward and improve it. If you have affinity groups in your schools, you should be linking with them for all of you that you do, but it's particularly for consultation. For those of you who don't know what affinity groups, it would be if you have, for example, a large Somali population and you have a Somali parents group in your school, or you have a Black parents group or a Chinese parents group, you may want to, they are taking care of looking at things that particularly concern their community, and you want to consult with them. What, from their viewpoint, with their ways of knowing and being, do you need to know in whatever you're consulting on? And also to bring them in for anything that school council is doing, and to link with them to make sure that they feel that they are an important part of council. You can do surveys, email, and even though we're in COVID, you can do socially distanced in-person surveys. And you can also hold in-person issue-based meetings. I suggested that as one option that you could have, for example, for your SIP. So you could have, this meeting is purely about the SIP, or this meeting is purely about bullying, and let's get together and this is what it's going to be. But don't forget to go to the margins. Make sure that you are hearing from the broad spectrum of your community. So I'm going to speak now about some tools that you will need to do this great work that you're going to do this year. And the first thing is money, right? Because what do I hear? I can't do that, Nancy. I don't have money. So where does your money come from? Well, you have public funds. I hope that you all know this, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of you don't know about this. Every school council every year gets $1.25 per student to a minimum of $300 if you're a small school, and a maximum of $1,000 if you're a large school. It comes in on the principal's budget line, and it comes in on budget line GL 41,500. If you do not know that, write that down. If you write nothing else tonight down, write that down. GL 41,500 is where your money, $300 to $1,000, will be from the TDSB. That is to be used for council business. In before times, when we were meeting in schools, that would cover the cost of food for a council meeting, child minding. If you were going to make hard copies of stuff, it would cover that. If you were bringing a speaker in, for example, and you needed to pay for it or give an honorarium, it would cover that. On Zoom, we don't have to do child minding and we don't have to do food, but we can do other council business. So you may be doing some activity and your parents, whoever's going to attend, may need certain tools that you don't have, and you might want to spend that money to buy some of those tools to make them available to them. You may need interpretation at the meeting. Even though on Zoom you have interpretation available, you may need to spend it on translation, and we will talk with Margaret about that very soon. But it's sitting there, $300 to $1,000. There are also TDSB sourced grants that are available for school councils, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Also on budget line 41,500 is $500 from the Ministry of Education, right? And that is earmarked specifically for outreach to the parent community. So that's any activities that you want to do with your parent community that you might need some money for. You've got $500 sitting there. So let me be clear. If you are a small school, you have $800 right off the top, budget line 41,500 to do your work. If you are a large school, you have $1,500 to do your work. And if you're in between, you've got between $800 and $1,500 to do your work. And you can do a lot of stuff for your parents and your community with that amount of money. As well, the program will be available this year Applications can be made up until, I believe I read, up until March. It's being distributed through the Parent and Community Engagement Office. And if you go on to the TDSB website and just type in Parent Reaching Out Grant, it will come up, because I did that the other day and there it was. So that's your public funds. You also have private funds, and the private, oh, I wanted to say, sorry about this. Because the money is coming in on the principal's budget line, the principal has to account for it, all right? So whatever you spend, you are going to have to provide receipts and make them available to the office administrator or the principal, because he or she has to account for it. But that doesn't mean the principal gets to decide how it's spent. That's your job as the chair, to get your council to decide how are you going to spend this money in a way that is transparent, accountable, and inclusive. The private funds, the money that you may choose to raise from fundraising, you are accountable for it. You must write a PSAB at the end of the year, accounting for all of the money that you raise. You need to account to your community. You had your hand in their pocket. You better be telling them what you did with that money. TDSB fundraising policy requires councils to decide how they're going to spend their money before they go out and ask for it. You cannot just raise a pile of money and then say, what are we going to do? So I'm just going to quickly go through this because of what I just said. The school council will determine financial needs, and you'll do that by consulting with your family and making plans. You may, and I strongly suggest that you have a budget committee, which would be chaired by your treasurer, and they're going to allocate the money based on council directives. So council may decide, you know what, this year we need to build the capabilities of our families to support learning. So we're going to run 3 workshops on X number of things. And we estimate that we will need $2,000, say $2,000, since we're talking about fundraising, $2,000 to do that. And you go to your budget committee and they say, well, we've only got $800. We have to raise $1,200. Okay, they go back, council now goes to their fundraising committee. And they say, how could we raise that money? And fundraising looks at a couple of suggestions, goes back to council with their suggestions, and council decides. Right? Now, fundraising may then run the event, but nothing is decided ever by a committee. They're set up at the directive of the council, and they come back to council. As the chair, it's your job to make sure that the committees are doing their work. Even if you assign that to another member, that they're the liaison with the committees, or the members who sit on those committees, they're the liaisons. It's your job to make sure that committees know what their parameters are and that they are reporting back. All right, so that's money. A couple more tools and things that you need to know about. The first is bylaws. I think I've mentioned this already. By the end of this month, it will be a new sample template for bylaws coming out for councils to use. Councils may choose to adopt those bylaws the way they are written for their council, adding in the specifics, for example, how many members your school council will have for elections. Or you may choose to take certain parts of the template out and adopt them as amendments to the bylaws that you already have. As I said, the next set of these webinars, I believe there's 3 of them starting next week. Yes, starting next week, will be on bylaws. Your email account, which I've already talked about, the shared TDSB email account is to be set up by your principal. There is the link to the site on the TDSB website. If you are having trouble, you may contact John Manilow at TDSB. As I said before, he's one guy over 500 schools. Patience. I mentioned that the TDSB has approved grants. Here's the link to finding out them. You require the shared TDSB email account to access the list of approved grants and apply for them. The Parent Reaching Out grant, I've told you, will be announced soon. The aim is that this year they will look at human rights, equity, anti-bias, and anti-Black, anti-Indigenous racism. There's the link. School Messenger, where you can send out email blasts to your community. It requires the TDSB shared account, but there's the link for it. Zoom and Thought Exchange, again, you need your shared email account to link up for those. And fundraising, the TDSB has a list of approved vendors, as many of you know. But this year, they're collecting names of other vendors that school councils are suggesting should be approved. And there's a contest. And if you enter the contest and you win, and don't ask me what the rules are, you get something from one of the vendors. You can contact, there's a link at the bottom, or you can contact Michelle Davis. That's michelle.davis@tdsb.on.ca for information on the list of vendors or how to take part in the contest. Okay. A couple last thoughts before I turn it over to you and your questions. I talked about relationships and trust. And I hope that tonight, as I've talked to you about how you can lead and your rights and responsibilities as leaders, that you are looking at ways that you can change the work of your council to answer the needs of your families. But remember that change moves at the speed of trust. As you're trying to build relationships, as you're reaching out to the margins, they're not going to buy into what you say right away, right? They have to trust you. When you're trying to build collaborative relationships with your teachers and with your principal, that's going to move at the speed of trust. And what can you do to help them to trust you? Again, try to be transparent, inclusive, and accountable in all that you do. And keep your eye on the ball. You are here for pupil achievement and to make the system accountable to your parents and caregivers. The training that I've mentioned. So bylaw training is next Tuesday, next Thursday, and then the following Thursday, the 25th. Two of them are in the evening. That says 6 o'clock. It should say 6:30. I'm going to have to tell the hub that one. And then there's one during the day. And in January, there will be another 3 sets of webinars, and they will look at digging deeper. Some of what I've said tonight, but how can you do your work so that you are being really effective, meaningful change agents in your school. I'll just give a plug to the community hub. This is if you go to tdsbhub.ca, it's been set up by the community support workers for model schools, and it's aimed for model schools, but they've got a lot of great information there that any school council would benefit from knowing. So I'll stop sharing, and I hope, and go to your questions. So if you put your questions in the Q&A, and let me just get through the. Okay, so someone says, how can parents know what those things should be? Okay, so if your kids are young, you have no idea what the school needs to improve on. Okay, that's a really good point. What you do know is what your child is struggling with. And if you have friends and their kids go to your school, your child's school, probably you've chatted, and there may be some things that you've noticed that you all feel this, this isn't quite working, or my child needs more support in this area, or that area. We are parents. We are not teachers. We do not know how to deliver curriculum in an effective way. That's not our job. But we do know our kids. We do know where they're struggling. We do know what they need help with. And whether your child's in JK or grade 12, you are aware of those things, and have the right to bring them up and to suggest them. What about money that was raised pre-COVID for initiatives that couldn't be done due to pandemic? All right, so Margaret may be able to answer this more, but the TDSB policy on fundraising is that you can only hold on to money for 2 years. The only reason you can hold it on to more than that is if you have a big project that's going to go over time. And the easiest thing I can suggest is something that's school centric. So let's say you're going to build a playground or something, and it's going to be a 5-year project, then you could carry it on for that. To be honest with you, right now, I can't think of a project that would last more than 2 years that would be family centric, unless probably if it was equity based and you were looking to improve or eliminate systemic practices that were not beneficial to all your families. That could be a longer practice. But Margaret, are you there? Wait for Margaret to come back. Somebody remind me if I don't come back to that. About Margaret, do you know what's happening with money that was raised before COVID?
I haven't heard yet, but that's definitely something that we could bring up with the finance group. And they could, let's see if one of them is online here.
Okay, so I'll move on and you can come back.
Yeah.
How do you rebuild trust with the principal if the previous chairs actively antagonize them? Well, I would ask, how would someone rebuild trust with you? And it's probably the same way. I think you have to, through your actions, make it clear how you like to operate with somebody. And sometimes we, because of that, we as parent leaders have to teach our principals how to collaborate, right? And we do it through our actions. So we do it through talking, being the same things you guys said to me when I asked you the question about the parent that was complaining about bullying, right? Be empathetic. The principals, right, this year and last year, boy, they have a lot on their plate. The last thing I'd want to be right now is a principal. And so to be empathetic for all that they're facing this year, and to asking where is there anything that council could do to support them, and to model the behavior that you want to be given to you. In self-regulation, they say for a child, don't look at the behavior, ask them why this behavior, why now? And if your principal is being, then say, why that and why now? You may be able to figure out the answer, you may not, but I think it's just being empathetic, being collaborative, and just keep plugging away. And you just might have to say, look, I am not the chairs that came before. I'm me, and this is how I like to work. And how do you like to work? and what's the best way that we can come together, because you're working for the same thing. The teacher's student and the parent's child are the same people, and you're working for those kids, and you may be coming at it from different angles, but it's kind of getting that across to them. Okay, double-edged sword with the principal, very reliant on him, her, but also must be critical of them at times. Yep. Yeah, yeah. Part of collaborating, and remember the quote at the beginning about being a change agent and being a leader is having the courage that Brené Brown said to lean into these difficulties, and letting them know that my job is to lead counsel. My job is to represent the parents and caregivers in this school, and we aren't going to agree on times. And I remember there was a principal at my school. I had an all-out shouting match with him at one point. And I still think back on it and think, oh my goodness, like, how did I go there? But we were both looking at things from our different ways, and we couldn't come together. We were so needing to be right that we couldn't listen to the other person. A couple of weeks later, I was volunteering in the kindergarten, and he came in and he sat down and he sat talking to me, and his wife had suddenly passed away maybe a month before, which is maybe why he was really angry in the staff room. And we sat and we had the most wonderful talk. And it wasn't about school council, it wasn't about parents, it was about being a parent and struggling with all that means. So it's about looking for the times and being willing to step up as a leader of your council into whatever moment it is. If you have to stand up and be brave and speak for your families, that's okay. And if you have to be sympathetic and empathetic to your principal, that's okay. How distinct are the SIP and the SSON? Is the SSON primarily for principal selection? Can we list other needs? No, the SSON is only for selection of principals. So what the reason PIAC created this years ago was they wanted parents and school councils to have a say in what principal should be assigned to their school. So does the people at the board know what your school is like? No, because they got 500 other schools to worry about. You know what your school is like. You know what your community is like. You know what they need to successfully lead your school. And so that's all you want in the SSON. What are you looking for in a school leader? The SIP is what areas under academics, equity, and well-being, what areas are maybe lacking or could use a bit more improvement. So two distinct things. How do we advocate for smaller classes if the reorganization has led to massive issues in a particular class? When my kids were in elementary school, the principal that I mentioned earlier that I would go in and we'd sit and talk about the agenda, she came to school council and she asked us to form a staffing committee. And trust me, that had never been done ever back then. And she gave us all the numbers, and we sat down because nobody wanted split grades. And we sat down as a committee and we worked out the staffing, which resulted in split grades. And it also resulted in us going out to the parent community and explaining why we had to have split grades. So we did the PR for the principal. That's not quite answering your question, but what you need to know, and if you have a representative on your staffing committee, the representative, as you are supposed to have, the representative would come back to council and would say, look, here are the numbers. These are the number of teachers that have been allocated to our school. and these are the numbers of students in each grade, and how's it going to be split? This is what we're seeing, this is what we're thinking. Are there any suggestions that I could take back to the staffing committee? And it's just about, as the chair, working with the principal. Look, this is what's in it for you. If we can collaborate, if we can get parental input in the staffing committee, as we are supposed to do, it will end up working for you, because then we will be able to explain to parents why it worked out that way. It doesn't mean the parents are going to be that much happier, but they are going to be maybe a little bit more confident because they knew parents were sitting on the committee working it out. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. There's always massive issues around reorganization. I think all you can do is form a committee. Is, again, I said you're advising, you can just give your best advice and put out your preference and be satisfied with the result. My email account is not settled. Can I continue with setting up Messenger? Margaret, are you there?
I am here. You cannot. Until the shared TDSB school council email account is up and working, you will not have access to school messenger.
Okay, thank you. Nicole, thanks for this one, Nicole. What information do principals get around supporting school council? They get some PD around it, it's my understanding. They know that the parent and community engagement office is there, and any questions they have are answered as quickly as possible. I believe that they get some training in school councils when they do their principal training. Margaret?
Sorry, say that again.
What information do principals get around supporting school council?
Well, Michelle is doing a lot of engagement PDs for principals, as well as they have access to the information that's posted on the internal as well as external website. So they do definitely have different opportunities to gain information.
Thank you. I hope that helps, Nicole. How do you balance the principal's position that no news is good news? Example, parents silent means tacit approval, with council's position that we need more voices heard. Well, it's your job to consult with the parents and the parent caregivers. So you do not need the principal's approval to consult with your parents. You don't want to go behind the principal's back and do it. But I would say, you know what? It's part of our job. The Education Act require. The reason I always say that is because principals have to follow the Education Act. The Education Act requires that we consult with the parent community, and we need to do that. We're thinking of doing it this way, this way, this way. This is what we're thinking of consulting on. Are there any issues that you think might be that you've heard or your staff has heard are important? And then go out and do it. And I know sometimes, look at the advice that I give, I know sometimes it's easier said than done. But again, it's about leaning into the challenge and just reiterating what the Education Act says are the requirements of school councils, and you as the chair must lead those requirements that the Ministry of Education has set out for you. And no news isn't always good news, because sometimes no news develops into stuff that hits the fan, and by then it's too late. How do we go about identifying, connecting with families at the margins if we don't know who, where they are? That's a really good question. I think that you probably do know who they are. if you sat down as a council and assessed, who do we usually hear from? And maybe that's what who are the parents that come out to our meetings? If we send out a survey, do we know who the parents are that are coming, that are coming out? And you don't need to know their names, but you can have an idea of where they are. I remember years ago helping a school that was struggling with their school council. And the principal said to me, oh, yeah, because it was mixed housing. So they had houses, but there were apartment buildings on the fringe of the community. Oh, we never hear from them. No, we never hear from them. They're mainly immigrants from one section of the world, and their language skills aren't that great, and we just don't hear from them. Well, that's your margins. And why don't you hear from them? And why aren't you trying to hear from them? So in community, you know, if I say to you that quite often the families that are at the margins are lower income, are working 2-3 jobs, are immigrant, are racialized, do not speak, newcomers do not speak the language, you probably have a good idea, 1, where they live, 2, where their places of worship, perhaps where they shop, are they in the park with their kids? And then it's about how will you approach them? How do you, when Messenger comes up and you get Messenger, do you need to create something and translate it into your top couple questions into your top languages and send it out to them so that they receive it? As I said, if you're in a model school, use your CSW and your settlement worker. They'll know who's at the margins. Your teachers, who do they not hear from? Who doesn't come out to parent-teacher interviews? You know, it might be a parent that's middle or upper economic levels, and they're working long hours at their own business. Those parents are at the margins too. How are you going to hear from them? Okay. Margaret, did you want to say any more? We have in the past had a number of questions of, do you want to address translation and interpretation?
Interpretation, yeah. All school councils have the opportunity to have interpretation at any of their meetings. In fact, I've already had several school councils request it. The way that you do it is you approach your school office and let them know that you're having a meeting on X date, X time, and we need Mandarin, Cantonese, Urdu, Punjabi at the meeting. Not necessarily those languages, but you get what I'm saying. You can request any number of language interpretation for your meeting. In the same vein, you may also have documentation that you want to have translated, and the office, once again, is your place to go to. They have the systems to be able to request your documents to be translated for you. It's best if you give it to your office in Word. Take note of the number of words that are in your document. Most of the time, I think in your case, you would be going from English to another language. So it's easy for you to put it into Word and take note of the word count. My office will cover translations for school-based initiatives up to 1,000 words. I'm getting not choked up, something went down the wrong way.
It's an emotional thing.
Oh, I get so emotional over interpretation and translation. But yes, so approach your office and we can do the translations for you. So don't think that your hands have to be tied as far as reaching out to those parents who don't come out because English is not their first language. We definitely can make them feel a part of the meeting, and especially with Zoom now, if they have access to the internet, we can also have interpreters come online for the meetings.
Thank you.
No problem.
One of the first questions that I forgot to go back to, is a parent rep the same as a class rep? Your parent members are elected or acclaimed in your election. The number of parent members that you have is dependent upon your bylaws. I suggest at least 10. And if you don't get that many election day, you can always appoint, as long as the way to do that is in your bylaws. A class rep is, some schools choose to have a parent as the rep in each class, and that they communicate with the other parents in the class about things that are going on there. I'll just ask for, how do we balance privacy and making assumptions about people's engagement with outreach efforts? For example, wellness checks. It seems like that could come off as offensive if it were targeted. That's a really good point. And it's all in how we communicate that, how we put it out there. So what you may do is just ask general questions of your entire population. In this time, like in the time of COVID, and we're coming up now talking, I don't want to get about shots for kids. Some school councils are running information sessions on what vaccine shots, what it means for kids, and what answering parents' questions. But in the time of COVID especially, there are a lot of there's a lot of wellness and mental health questions, both for our students and for our families who are struggling to cope with a lot. So just having a listening circle on the topic of coping with COVID, and maybe having a couple of set questions and just letting people come in and talk or share ideas about what they're doing. You start to understand where there may be general needs. And if you start with the general needs, as you build trust, you can get then down to more specific needs. You may realize that, you know what, there's a lot going on in our community, and it would be really helpful if once a month as a school council, we offered a relaxation yoga class, and people came online and did that. Or maybe you're hearing in the community certain things that are going on, and you just make up a list of resources in your community. You can always go phone 211, the city number, and ask in your area what resources are there for, and have some specific things that you want to know, that you then let your community know about. But you are quite right, Lindsay. It's very important to be respectful of your families, to not make assumptions, to not let our assumptions and our biases about our families color what we do, how we speak, what we say. Look at, some more came up. Margaret, did you hear anything about pre-COVID money?
No, not yet. Probably won't hear anything until tomorrow.
Nicole advises that the student survey comes out this year. Can we offer off-site events? Any insurance concerns? If you offer anything off-site, you must have the extra insurance. And I would ask that any off-site events, keep in mind your community, and is it something that the majority of people in your community would feel comfortable doing or going to? Or would it leave out a significant portion of your community that would not feel comfortable doing it because they couldn't afford to, for religious or cultural reasons? So just think about that. You can't have events that are going to please everybody all the time, but you do want to be cognizant of the the different people, communities within your school, and would they feel comfortable, or do they always feel left out? We're not allowed to gather at the schoolyard, so thinking a local park. Yeah. Oh, I see. To have an event at a local park. Yeah, you would need insurance. Yep. Will there be field trips this academic year? What's the role of parent council in those events? I'm not sure if there are field trips. I wouldn't think there would be for a while. School council could suggest field trips. I remember when my kids were in elementary school, I didn't think they were doing enough field trips. And so I created with some other parents, we created a binder listing places that they could go if they offered educational programs, what the cost was, all of that, so that the teachers just had to go and look it up. How do we arrange insurance for off-site events? Margaret. Margaret.
Yep. All things school council can be found on the external TDSB webpage, and you go to tdsb.on.ca, and then on the right-hand side, you're going to see community. On the left-hand side, you will then see how to get involved. And then once you hit that, you will see school councils, and you will see, like I said, all things school council on that page. We might be able to show that actually. That might be good. What do you think, Nance?
Yep. Okay,
let me bring that up here.
While you're looking for that, I'll just say the final thing that I want to say. I want, sometimes we as school councils come up with ideas of things to do that we think will be a great idea. And we put some planning into it, we do it, and it doesn't turn out quite the way we thought. First of all, with everything that you do, you should have do an assessment of it afterwards. What worked, what didn't work, who are we hoping to reach out to, did we? But if it's a good idea, it's still a good idea, even if it doesn't work. So if it doesn't work the first time, but you like the idea, then go back in, figure out what you didn't do right, and try it again. And maybe the next time it'll work better. If you just, oh, you know what, we didn't do that, we missed this, and just tweak it a little bit, and it can get better. Margaret?
Yeah, so I'm sharing with you my screen. You can see it's tdsb.on.ca. And on the right-hand side, you're going to go to community. On the left-hand side, you're going to go to how to get involved. And then these are all the different ways that you can get involved. You can see school councils is here. Also, this is where you're going to find the parent reaching out grant information, but we can go into school councils. If my computer cooperates, there we go. And you can see all things school councils here. Insurance, you'll see it there, fundraising there. How to get access to your email account. This is the Zoom page. So if you want to request a Zoom webinar, what you can do is you can come down here and you can see which ones are already, which ones have already been booked. These are the ones that are happening right now. I can let you know that my office has access to 4 500 capacity webinars, 1,000 capacity webinar, and 3,000 capacity webinar. So I show you this page because if you're planning an event, you can say, okay, we need a webinar. It's going to be 1,000 people maximum that we need it for. So you would not plan it for November 25th. Because you can see that the majority of my webinar licenses have already been used. Also, this is a good place for you to go to too, if you want to see some events that are planned. We also have that on the external the general TDSB webpage as well, with a lot more information. But that, yeah, that's where you'd find it. How's that?
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And I take this opportunity to say that if you are doing some training for your parents so that they can help to support their kids, don't always think that you have to go to some external source. You know, if you want to do something academically, who better to teach parents how to support the kids' learning than the teachers who are teaching the kids? So go to your teachers and ask, would they be willing to do a half-hour presentation for your parents on a Zoom meeting about whatever the topic is? And with Zoom, they can do it from home. They don't have to hang around the school till a 7 o'clock meeting. Or you might ask if they could tape themselves, or you could come in socially distanced and masked to tape them doing a presentation, which you would then present on a Zoom meeting to your parents. Perhaps your principal would be willing to do some presentations. Your teacher rep maybe they would do something. Go, if you need some, go to the TDSB, to the main office. Maybe someone coming out from the wellness committee at the board, or the reading consultant, a math consultant. Now, I have heard that it's sometimes difficult to get them, but those are sources that are sitting. We're the largest board in Canada, and we have infinite sources. And they, especially with Zoom, where it's much easier, I know this myself, it's much easier to go to meetings because you can do it from your home. So take advantage of that and use the vast skill sets that are sitting in our board. Also, use the vast skill sets that are sitting in your community. Maybe you want to do a night or a couple of things on cooking and favorite meals of your families, and families could sign up and do a presentation of something that they make that they want to share with everybody, or somebody has a skill set and they want to teach how to sew or how to paint something, or an instrument, whatever you're sitting on an enormous wealth of skills and understandings that you could have at your meetings.
Nancy, can I just show one more thing?
Yep.
Okay, 1 second here. This is something that I'm actually kind of excited about, in any way that you can be excited about something on a computer. This is something that's brand new. In fact, it's just come up in the last maybe 2 weeks that it's gone live. So this is great for parents, caregivers. This is all of the major events happening in the TDSB all in one calendar. So parents now don't have to go from one web page to another to be able to find out what's going on. Everything is listed on one calendar. What's happening is the different offices that are responsible for each of these events are contributing to this Google Calendar. So if you go into any of these, for instance, I know this one is one that, okay, here's one of Nancy's right here. So if you click on it, you will get all the information that you need to be able to join this meeting. Okay, so this is just something cool that's come up. If you want to attend the French immersion, all that information is there. Okay, so everything now that's important in the TDSB is all going to be located on one calendar, rather than parents having to hop around from one calendar to another. I think this is a great initiative.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
Somebody has asked, what's the difference between a webinar and a meeting?
Oh, okay. This is my forte. Okay, so right now we are on a webinar. And a webinar, basically, it's where people come to it and they sit and listen to somebody who's presenting. Nancy's presenting tonight and I'm jumping in where necessary. So it's more or less the audience or the participants are sitting and listening. So that's a webinar. A meeting is different. It's more interactive. That's where you'll see, if you've been on a Zoom meeting, you'll see a whole bunch of different faces on the screen. So all these people have the opportunity to talk with the hosts of the meeting. Whereas in a webinar, people in the audience don't have the opportunity to talk back. The only way that you can communicate is either with chat if it's turned on or Q&A. And the capacity for webinars is much larger than it is for a typical Zoom license, meeting license. A meeting license has a capacity of 300, including hosts and co-hosts, whereas a webinar, it can be whatever. There's 50,000 webinar capacity, you know, like Zoom, when they do their own annual meeting, they have thousands upon thousands of people, but that's done with a webinar.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
We are out of time. There's one last question I'm going to answer, and thank you for asking. It reminds me that I wanted to tell you anyway. If you have any questions that come up in the future, you can contact me at my email withEqualStep@gmail.com. Or you can contact Margaret. Any questions about school councils will end up back in my inbox anyway. But if you forget my email, you can write to the Parent and Community Engagement Office and they will send it to me, or you can write directly to me at withEqualStep@gmail.com. I want to thank you for all of the work that you do. Leading is a very difficult job sometimes, but it's also very rewarding. And I assure you that everything you do, though sometimes it may not seem that way, is appreciated by your families, by your parents and caregivers, by your students, by your teachers, and even by your principals. And most of all, it's appreciated by me and by Margaret and Michelle. So thank you very, very much for joining us. I hope that you will come back to one of the other ones on bylaws or digging deeper. Have a great rest of the night, and I hope the rest of the week is good for you and you have a lovely weekend. Thank you. Good night.